In this program, we're going to look at collisions and analyse the parts which energy, force and momentum play in them. Space gives us a rare opportunity to study objects free from the effects of friction. A body in space will keep its velocity until it collides with another body. An object won't change its velocity until a collision applies an outside force to it. Unless something is stopped, it'll drift along forever. It would take quite a collision to stop the Earth or change the course of the Moon. When a meteorite collides with the Moon, its kinetic energy causes it to blast out a crater. Much of the kinetic energy is turned to heat, melting the rocks to liquid. We can get a good idea of what happens during an impact by looking at a drop falling into a cup of milk. If you look closely at moon craters, you can sometimes see a peak in the middle. On Earth, we're protected from most meteorites by the atmosphere. Most of their energy is dissipated as heat through friction with the atmosphere. Sometimes an extra large meteorite gets through and blasts a crater, such as here at Wolf Crater. It's 700 meters across, similar to a moon crater. However, it's 3/4 full of sand and the walls have been partly eroded. When the trampolinist hits the trampoline, most of his kinetic energy is returned to him as he springs back up again. This is known as an elastic collision. An elastic collision is one where all the kinetic energy before the collision is returned as kinetic energy after it. None is lost as heat. In practice, this never quite happens, except in collisions of subatomic particles, but we can get pretty close. All ball games depend on elastic collisions to varying degrees of efficiency. The club slows down when it hits, losing kinetic energy. Up to 80% of this energy is kept as kinetic energy as the ball springs away. Only 20% is lost as heat. A tennis ball is only about 50% efficient and a squash ball as little as 10%. The energy that isn't transferred to the ball is dissipated as heat. When a player hits a ball, energy is transferred from her muscles to the swing of the racket, then through its strings to the ball itself. In each part of this process, some of the energy is converted to heat. When a skateboarder skates down one side and back up the other, he's making a near elastic collision with the Earth. The friction losses have to be made up by working with the legs. However, once he falls off, the collision is no longer elastic. There is friction. Sometimes kinetic energy is deliberately converted into heat. For example, when we want to stop this plane in a very short distance, we're going to have to dissipate energy very quickly. The arrestor hook dragging on the ground gives some idea of the heat that will be generated. The tyres touch and some of the rubber is vaporized. Due to the restraints of friction, tyres can't slow a vehicle much faster than 1 G. However, most of the energy is absorbed by a wire cable pulling against a large pair of disc brakes. Pads grip the disc and generate heat by friction. The plane's energy goes up in smoke. Even if the rubber could have held such a sudden stop, it's doubtful if the plane would still fly as well with brakes big enough to do the job. When space capsules return to Earth, they too use friction to dissipate their kinetic energy through friction with the air. The outside heat shield vaporizes or ablates, carrying away the heat. When a car hits a wall, its kinetic energy must also go somewhere. When the front of a car crumples, energy is absorbed. The more it crumples, the more energy is absorbed. Safety engineers design cars to crumple evenly in a crash. They choose which members will crumple and how much. The advantage of crumpling over an elastic collision is that the stopping force is even. It doesn't increase with distance. The idea is to have the bonnet crumple and the passenger compartment remain rigid. By looking at high-speed film of a collision, engineers can see exactly where cars buckle. It's all very well for the front or rear end to crush, but if a car is hit side on, the passengers will become part of the energy absorption process. This is a top shot of a car hitting a normal power pole. The energy-absorbing crumpling process intrudes right into the cabin. This is an experiment with a power pole that crumples to absorb some of the energy. The crushing is evenly matched between the car and the pole. A top shot shows the honeycomb behind the pole being crushed. The pole hardly intrudes into the cabin at all. The lesson here is to try to avoid hitting a normal pole side on. Truck cabins don't have much spare metal to crumple. They're very rigid as they're designed to withstand a full load hitting from behind. But although a truck cabin is designed to withstand the large forces involved in a sudden stop, a human is not. If we can slide to a stop, the forces are minimal. If you stop in 1/100th of the distance you fell, then the stopping force is 101 times your weight. We use the force generated by a sudden stop in hammering. A trampoline is designed to give a long stopping distance. Similarly, grass gives a softer collision than a hard surface where the change of velocity is sudden. The momentary force on the joints and bones of the leg can be extremely large. In order to reduce jarring force, modern running shoes are designed to reduce the force of impact on the feet and legs by increasing the distance over which your heel stops. Shoes are made with a padded rubber sole that acts rather like a mini trampoline. When the feet hit the ground, the foam rubber compresses, and the feet are slowed down over an extra few millimeters. In this test, a section of an aircraft fuselage is dropped to see the effect on the safety of the passengers. If the aircraft shell had been rigid, the forces would have been large enough to smash the plane or damage the passengers. A full hold of luggage causes the bottom to crush instead of bouncing. This 50-ton forged steel flask designed to carry nuclear waste has been made to withstand great forces, but when it's dropped onto a rigid plate, even from only 10 meters, the force of impact over the short stopping distance is enormous. The container springs open slightly, allowing a few drops of water to spray out. A motorbike rider has very little protection. Even if you just fell off a stationary bike, the force with which your head would hit the ground is enough to kill you. If the bike is moving, there's a horizontal component to think about as well. The horizontal velocity won't make a great deal of difference to the force with which you hit the road, but it could seriously affect you if you hit something else, like the curb or a rock, as you're sliding along the ground. The traffic authority tests the ability of helmets to absorb energy and spread forces evenly over the skull. The challenge is to make a helmet that gives the head evenly cushioned stopping. A helmet is essential for any rider. The only thing that can be crushed to absorb energy is its fiberglass. It isn't how fast you're going that matters, but how fast you stop. The next thing we're going to look at is inertia and momentum. A body keeps travelling unless there's good reason to stop. This accident is the same principle in reverse. The children stay at their original velocity, 0 relative to the camera, while the car moves suddenly from under them. The dummies used in these tests weigh the same as people and have the same flexibility. They're fitted with accelerometers and wired to computers. Dummies such as these are used for tests where it's difficult to find volunteers. They don't mind the odd somersault as they're run under by a car or a quick hit on the head. But even dummies prefer to wear their seatbelt. The original Swedish designer of the lap sash seatbelt shows how it can save lives. The idea of a seatbelt is to make sure that you slow down at the same rate as the car. Without seatbelts, people are thrown around violently inside the car. This demonstrates the danger of holding a baby on your lap without a seatbelt. The idea of the seatbelt is to prevent people sliding forward. Now we're going to look at the role of momentum in collisions. Even though a lot of energy was given off as heat, sound and damage in this collision, no momentum was lost. After the crash, the momentum is distributed between the bodies involved in the collision. When a small car hits a large truck, the combined mass is now larger. 10 times the mass, 1/10 the velocity. When a car hits a rock wall, it changes the way the Earth is spinning. When two bodies with equal and opposite momentum collide head-on, the positive and negative momentums add up to 0. And the same for vehicles. In these collisions, some, but not all, of the arrow's momentum is transferred to the apple. The momentum and energy transferred to the apple can be measured by the height of the swing of the apple. If we look at collisions carefully, we can see the vector nature of momentum. Sometimes this leads to angular momentum. In order to show that momentum is a vector quantity, Volvo has been training a high diving team. As the car accelerates, it builds up horizontal momentum and pushes the Earth back a little. As it falls over the edge, it increasingly acquires vertical momentum as well. We can see its direction of travel changing. Of course, the Earth is accelerating upward as well. When the car hits the ground, its new vertical momentum is quickly transferred back to the Earth, and the Earth stops moving upwards. The horizontal component of momentum remains until friction transfers it to the Earth.